Hello, so my name is Louisa. I am an assistant psychologist with the wonderful Andreia, and I'm also a final year psychology student. And one of my favourite things is just nature, to be honest, and spending as much time in nature as I possibly can. And so I'd like to hand over that little bit about me to Andreia and to Chris to introduce themselves.
Hi, I am Andreia Santo, and I am a clinical psychologist, a counseling and clinical psychologist, a family and systemic therapist, practitioner, and I am also doing a hypnotherapy training right now. I love music, I play music, I love making art as well. I'm a new recently I started making art, and I love nature as Louisa, and it's totally our pleasure, privilege to be today, having this third podcast for you guys. Yeah. So Chris, if you want to say something.
Hello, I'm Chris. I'm an artist, UK artist. I do painting, write a lot of fiction, also philosophy. I like thinking about the history of philosophy, just thinking in general. In terms of psychology, just interested in the philosophy of the mind, I suppose, and just how the mind influences everything in our life, I guess. Very much not professional in the psychology world, but just got an interest in it, and broadly speaking on knowledge and how we apply that to the world, basically. That's me.
Cool.
And I think that fits in really wonderfully with the idea that, we all have our individual perspectives and things, which fits so well with the topic that we're going to be talking about today, which is social construction. This is something that I've been sort of learning about as a psychological concept, sort of a bit like more recently within my university and through my work with Andreia and things. And the basis of the approach is that the reality that we each know is constructed by our sort of society and our surroundings, and that our knowledge of the world that we're living in is a product of human sort of thought and how those things have been pieced together throughout years and years and generations as well. And this is something which isn't just based in psychology, like it was actually much more of a philosophical sort of thing originally. And I know that sort of Immanuel Kant and Karl Marx and things have sort of spoken along slight different names for things and things out there as well. And it's something which Germans. Something which has sort of grown. So then they were sort of progressed to sort of symbolic interactionism, which was more of like George Mead and sort of from his book, which was in the 1930s, and then sort of developed again and was sort of spoken about as the social construction of reality in a book by Berger and Luckman. And this is something which is sort of sociology, philosophy and psychology, and it all sort of comes together, I guess, under this sort of idea. And I find it really interesting because one of the things that I am super interested in as well is sort of language and how we sort of use that. And that plays in a massive part as to social construction and like how things are, how we are and how we interpret things. And a linguist called Benjamin Worf, and he basically spoke about how our native language, whatever that may be, how that determines the way that we sort of think and we perceive things based on how things are described. And there's different types of language with different sort of basis and things, which I find to be absolutely super interesting because it's sort of this concept that language isn't just something that's passive, something that we sort of use just to express ourselves, but actually through that it has such like a strong meaning, and it can sort of precondition maybe how we think about things and the way that things are sort of passed on and transmitted between us through these like stories and these narratives that we all create. And this it's something which, although it's been going on for years and years, I think is becoming more and more relevant as people start to think more and more about maybe sort of differences or maybe not differences between us as individuals, and how that sort of feeds into things. A bit like one of the first things I sort of wanted to talk about was gender, and how we have to sort of start off with, we have obviously our biological sex, which is sort of male or female, and that comes down to our chromosomes and things like that. But then there's also this concept of gender, and gender being different from biological sex, where it's sort of this creation of men and women, and these the sort of meanings, the values, the sort of beliefs around what it is to be a man or to be a woman, and these characteristics, which really feeds into the idea of like gender roles and sort of stereotypes as to what people should be. And those are things which, you know, they've changed throughout history, like they're still changing, and how that's sort of affected by our society. Like, this is a cultural thing as well. Like, it's different in different cultures, like the expectations, or, you know, what's acceptable for men or women, or, you know, people who are non-binary. Like, that is really different across different societies based on, you know, our history and things, and how that things have developed. And obviously, as a woman, I actually have that sort of lived experience of this. And that's partially why I find this so interesting, because I think it really sort of helps you sort of challenge the ideas around, I don't know, maybe being brought up to have certain opinions or certain ideas about, you know, what might be right or wrong, or what you should or shouldn't do, or things like that, which, yeah, seriously interests me. And I mean, it's really worth, I sort of mentioned it as well, like when it comes to gender as well, this is something which is becoming even more sort of discussed and made aware with sort of activists and things, not just from like the feminism point of view, but from people actually talking more about there not just being this really binary sense of gender, where there's actually, you have like people who are non-binary, or people who maybe don't identify with how they were assigned at birth and things like that. And that's sort of, I think that's really helping people to open up their minds to, you know, these like standard gender roles as well. And actually, like, why do we maybe think like this? Like, where does it come from? Like, who put this in place? Like, where did this idea come from? Because it's always been something, you know, which has been about these like differences. It's in history and things, like it's everywhere, isn't it? And there's been so many movements and things which have really developed that over the years. I mean, you know, with rights and everything, it feeds in so much to how we live our lives and everything. And as with gender, I mean, it's not just gender, there's race as well. Like, race is obviously something which has been a real sort of like really brought to everyone's attention recently as something which hasn't just gone away. And, you know, what is actually different with race? Like, we're all people. Like, we might have these sort of, you know, visual differences, like identifiable differences on the outside, but actually this isn't something which is like a deep-rooted biological thing. Like, although people may look different, it really doesn't come much deeper than that. Like, we have different sort of experiences because of that, but those experiences are so structured around how we move through the world and how other people maybe treat us and things like that as well. And these sort of divides between people based on, you know, the colour of our skin and things like that are something which has been like created to kind of support a power divide. And that is obviously something which I don't have that lived experience of, but something that is so important to sort of keep in mind. And I find that the idea of like social construction and like where have these ideas come from and why do we think this way is a really good way, or it has been a really good way for me, and I can imagine would be for other people to sort of challenge these sort of thoughts and these beliefs and things that people might have about what that actually means. And again, I mean, it fits with like things like disability as well, and the idea that someone might be disabled, but actually the things that might be really limiting them from moving about in the world is the structures that we have in place, and actually making sure that things are really accessible to people, whether that's accessible from like a learning disability type or like a physical disability. There's so many different aspects to it, and it's really important to make sure that I think in psychology it's something which is becoming more aware that we are gaining those voices as well. And actually it's not something which is maybe just studied in like a really medical model type sense, but making sure it's also something which is discussed socially and like societally, and how people have different experiences based on, you know, how they are, who they are, like how they've grown up and things, and these sort of constructed perceptions and views and things that make it more difficult or easier for different people as well. And I think this is where that whole idea of like power and like social hierarchy really comes into, quite interestingly, because it kind of sets that precedent for what is normal or what is right or what is accepted. And a really good way of maybe challenging why that's normal or right, or what normal even means potentially. But that's, you know, that could go off and off about what is normal. But it's just, yeah, it's how these things can be upheld and passed on through the generations, and how obviously there's change. Like this isn't something which is just completely stagnant. It's something which develops, and, you know, making sure that we are, as people, are using this as a way to help us think critically maybe about things and help things sort of progress in a really positive way. Just maybe break down some of the harsh sort of constructions of society that make things really difficult for people, and, you know, discriminate and make sure that people's human rights are really at the forefront of everything. And yeah, making sure that the language we use, that ties in to make sure that how we're expressing this is done in the right way, to make sure that we're not discriminating. We're all trying to treat people equal and actually get to that point where everybody has that opportunity. I want to say that obviously, as I've mentioned, like my lived experience of these things is really limited. Like I'm a woman, but aside from that, I fit within, you know, a very privileged stance, and so I'm very aware that I have a limited knowledge, and I'm always wanting to like learn and know more, and I encourage people to like share experiences and stuff like that to you know, help with that, help us all. Because I think it's so important to make sure that we have that open mind. And by having that sort of idea of something as a social construct, for me, that means I can think critically about maybe my own biases. Because I know that obviously we all have them, like how we've grown up is different. Like I know the three of us will have differences as well. Like for, you know, I've grown up here in England and things, so I know that Andreia is Portuguese, so that's going to be different. I'm a woman, whereas Chris is a man, like that's going to be different again. And therefore we're going to come at things from really different perspectives. Like we might have the same situation, like we're all experiencing this at the moment, but our perception of that is going to be really different, and that's going to be affected by our previous experiences and all of these other things which have sort of been constructed around us. And I just think that is a bit mind-blowing really when I think about it. But I really wanted to know what it meant for like the likes of you two, like what you sort of thought about it as an approach, what that sort of means for you.
Who goes first?
Do you want to lead, Andreia?
Okay, you're such a gentleman. So, thank you, Louisa, very much for that introduction. I think it was a beautiful introduction. I think it was very comprehensive, as much as it can be, because obviously this theme is a theme that is very relevant in our existence, I think, for our existence. And since our existence, I imagine human beings in the caves, or maybe even before the caves, like trying to find symbolic ways to communicate among themselves, trying to find a common ground with all the instincts kicking in, all the endorphins and all the hormones like shouting in their ears. I imagine that those times might have been quite interesting, and I imagine that, of course, that was the time of the human made social construction. So I want just to kind of highlight these two words, social and construction. These two words for me are very in a way, they might make us feel many different emotions. They definitely, certainly make me feel different emotions, from puzzlement to agitation to joy to anger, sometimes to sadness, because social construction starts from that idea of social beings building meaning, creating meaning together, and obviously applying that meaning within their own cultures and subcultures and structures and substructures. And to me, it makes me feel like there is always the yin and yang in everything. So obviously social meaning is important when it comes to creating a middle ground, so everybody can come together and share symbolic understanding, and also freedom to explore whatever they have in their minds, whatever experiences they go through. I think it's quite challenging for beings that are free to suddenly come across and get in touch with so many different emotions that they experience within one circumstance, for example. So one circumstance, especially when we are children, we are so susceptible, we are so keen and eager and curious. When we are faced with situations, we can't help it but feel that mixed emotion bag. It is curiosity / stubbornness / wanting to understand, and confusion. There are so many emotions that I feel this social constructionism, despite the fact of, I think it is an innate quality, because we all need to communicate as nature does. It is also, of course, it also evolves through the times we are experiencing. And the times we are living today, for example, are not easy at all. And you can see, I don't want to bring up Ukraine war or anything like that so much, is not the point. But for example, it is definitely, there is a separation, for example, in the social construction for particular individuals and also groups and also cultures. And for example, here in Portugal, I feel that we are becoming more aware of different cultures as well, with everything that is going on. I do think that we're far from being experts in culture, for example. Having an understanding of social constructionism, therefore, is very valuable tool, and to make space to think about what it truly represents. Just another small thing I want to add is that having been researching unconditional love in terms of scientific grounds, I have come to realize that individuals, they have the potential biologically to grow. If they are given the freedom to exercise their thinking, they can easily discover joy and freedom in everything that they do. If they are not, in a social situation that intimidates them, or in difficult, going through difficult experiences, individuals are innately predisposed as well to find by themselves, to actually think about these things and question meanings, and restructure their thinking, their bias, if they are also offered that arena, if you like, or that platform, if a question is welcome from them about, why are things the way they are, and what is this, and how. So all of that is quite interesting for me as well. I always, when I was studying family and systemic therapy, I've come across that idea It was very, it was taught to the class, and that definitely changed my entire perspective on my personal life and how I want to, and how I communicate and how I feel and how I construct my own world and my own set of meanings. And that is something, it was a remarkable experience actually. So this was like my summary, and I'm very keen to hear our painter, Chris, and your thoughts, your views, because I know you have great interest in the field, in these areas, and I know you have accumulated understanding too.
Yes, there's a lot to chew on there, really. So it's hard to know where to begin. But I guess, I'm sort of a little bit skeptical of it as a framework overall, because one question I'd have initially is, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Louisa, but it seems to be suggesting that no knowledge exists outside of, sort of what we can create. So, which I sort of come from a logical computer science background, and for me, mathematics and sort of logic and all this other stuff is a sort of way that we can mathematics is a description of nature, right? So, maybe you can expand on that later. And I'm just starting from that point because initially I'd be skeptical because my sort of analytical brain is thinking, well, yes, to a certain degree, things are constructed, in terms of identity and all this sort of thing. But is all knowledge constructed purely by individual human consciousness interacting? I'm pretty skeptical about that. It seems sort of solipsistic, it's like it's sort of almost assuming that language is a sort of, I know that language is a sort of symbolic language, right? But I do think that something exists outside of my individual consciousness. So I don't know, it just sort of, in that sense, it sort of feels a bit reductive, maybe, I guess, but I sort of riff off something else now, I guess. In terms of the language, language is an interesting thing to study. I'm not an expert on linguistics and sort of all this sort of thing. But I was actually thinking while Louisa was delivering her sort of speech on all this about this sort of alternative sort of psychedelic sort of philosopher, Terence McKenna, who'd often talk about language being a sort of basically how let me just try and think. He talked about culture a lot, so I'm just trying to draw a lot of threads in a minute. He was skeptical about the idea of culture itself being he said culture is not your friend. He this idea of the group identity being a sort of good thing, as it were. He sort of see it as a sort of virtual reality that's created, maybe in some respects. I'm sort of butchering how I'm explaining the idea, but essentially his idea was that culture is this thing that we create around ourselves, and it's not necessarily. There's sort of an appeal to universalism in a sense, but his whole thing was that maybe we think too, and I think actually, Louisa, you were actually hinting at this in your own speech. Actually, we should probably not worry too much about I'm male, I'm female, I'm this, I'm black, I'm white, or whatever. It's more about human values, right? So it's not so much about separating ourselves into ever smaller divisive little boxes of I'm this, I'm that, I'm a cis man, I'm a cis woman, blah 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 blah. It's not so much about that, because we should try and focus more on universal human values of which will change over time. And a lot of the German philosophers would say, well, this is all just created by human beings anyway. There's no actual morality. There's no objective morality anyway. So, sort of pessimistic philosophers Nietzsche is the obvious example, I guess, of that, of someone who would say there is no objective morality and you have to create your own morality, but it's an aside anyway. I don't know where I'm going with that. I'm sorry, I'm just going off one, but
no, it's very
in terms of the gender,
enlightening. I understand what you mean.
Yeah, I find it really interesting.
It seems like the gender. Yeah.
I think what you were saying,
like the gender and that's very interesting contemporary. Yeah.
Do you want to say about the gender, Chris? Go ahead.
Okay.
Sorry, we don't need to interrupt you.
Yeah, so I mean that's sort of, sorry, Louisa, I interrupted you. So I just had too much coffee. But I think that's a very contemporary issue at the minute, right? Because there's this whole culture wars sort of debate around, people want to transition to the opposite sex, and it's a very big fraught issue, right? And I mean, I think, I am a man, I'm biologically male, but I think there's this interesting quote. I think it's from Virginia Woolf. But she said something like, the creative mind is an androgynous mind. And I'm a great believer in that. I think that true creativity actually comes from a place of androgyny. And I think if you become too fixated on what masculinity or femininity is, then you probably lose some of whatever your individual self-actualization thing is, like your personality. It's like, for me, I'm a man, yeah, but I don't hyperfixate on being masculine because it doesn't really mean anything, essentially. I don't think. I mean, I don't think it. I mean, I know there's biological hormonal differences, right? I know that, I understand that, but so I'll be more prone to aggression and sort of more propensity to. But anyway, I'll let you carry on with some stuff that I'm just sort of riffing a bit on that too much.
No, it's super interesting, Chris. From some of the bits that you've sort of highlighted there, I think it's really interesting because I think as with everything, you have loads of different, especially with psychology, there's loads of different sort of approaches to it, and they can all be quite, it's kind of like a spectrum in that sense, isn't it? You get some which are really, really, I guess maybe more radical or harsh, or it's all encompassing, just that. And then you get other ones where there's maybe more of a combination drawing from different things. And I think, it's kind of about that balance. So if you were to take it at a really sort of extreme level, then you would sort of be the whole, everything's made up. But I think if you use it more as an idea that's kind of in your head, that can sort of help you to sort of, for me anyway, I use it to help me think critically about things, to sort of my own biases, or just to sort of help with those things, to help me sort of when I go into a situation, or maybe if I'm in a situation, to keep in mind that someone else might have, that different experience and things. And I think it's really interesting with the whole side of things with identity and things, because identity is such a big part of, for a lot of people, identity is huge. By maybe realizing you maybe don't fit the sort of majority identity and stuff like that is also massive. And I've sort of witnessed a debate about this recently, it was around autism and stuff, and neurodivergent and those sorts of labels and things like this. And it was really interesting that sort of people sort of brought up how at first you kind of need that recognition of those differences to be able to sort of draw everyone up and into the same playing field, and then from that you could
categorize them
down again. So it's kind of recognizing that they're there and they do shape how things are, and then maybe one day from that, once everybody's maybe a bit reached a more equal playing field, that might then help to take it back to a place where you don't need as many.
I mean, difference obviously exists. I mean, you only have to look at anything in reality to know that there's yin and yang, and to be really glib about it. And men and women are different, biologically, and I don't think that's a radical thing to say, to be honest. But I guess it just depends on what do you do with that knowledge, really, I suppose, and that reality.
Exactly.
And it doesn't have to. We've had many years of hundreds of years really of feminism and action, or that has been taken, sort of rebalancing power, which has been good, obviously, to say the least, because women have had a pretty hard deal for a long time, just because of the way that things have been structured, and that has to be questioned. And again, it applies to anything where there's an equal power dynamic. And it doesn't mean that everyone's always going to be equal, right? Because it's impossible. I mean, and what does that even mean? I mean, what does it even mean for everybody to be literally equal in terms of a literal equality if you're into a mathematical symbol? It's impossible. I mean, what does that even mean? But I'm ranting a bit.
May I say something? Because
go on, sorry, Andrew.
This is so exciting. Oh my God, my blood is boiling. I really like both of your ideas. Are really great. I think they're complementing each other, and I think that it is exactly about it's evolution. It's about from an angle of evolution, and now actually for this idea of social construction to be deemed correct. Think about it. How much was that? I think it was very, very difficult for humankind together to have that on books, like spread across the mainstream schools, for example, because it was not until recently that thinking started being considered a vital thing. Before it was more about paying the bills and overcoming illness and overcoming this and that, and so it was very erratic in terms of our social construction. It was very, I would say, way less comprehensive as it is today. And I think this kind of different ideologies and theories gives us that platform, as Louisa was saying, platform for that healthy discussion. And also, without forgetting the ideas that Chris was also sharing, which is the ideas of human morality, or meaning, the core principles that actually are universal for all beings, like creativity, like being kind and respectful, respecting others, things like that. But I guess this could be perhaps a little like another platform that needs to stick together to the social constructionism platform. It's like all platforms need to be even out in a way, or in other words, we should all be giving that care to the different ideologies that makes who we are, because I've already understood that I am self and I am experiencing existence. So existence is always, I'm always restructuring my understanding of myself, not of myself, but I'm gaining more understanding of who I am in a biopsychosocial way. Of course, because of my self-discovery, supporting me with that. But at the same time, the constructs I come across will help me or not, or will give me the freedom or not. Yeah, make me stumble or not, make me feel anxious or not.
Yeah, they're sort of tools, aren't they, I guess?
I don't know about you guys, but when I was studying, I used to feel quite anxious. Like, I was in primary school, secondary school, and I would be the last person speaking, or I would be very reserved and shy, and actually not very, a little bit self-confidence, like low in terms of learning, catching up. It is not that I was not capable. It was that I already had construct that. I already had in that self social construction for myself that, well, I'm already so far behind in comparison with that great student that it will be difficult for me. It would be difficult for me to get out of that place and to relax and not worry and not feel hypervigilant, because that was my social construction. That was my, let's say, tapestry. That also was maybe tapestry of some teachers that I picked up on, and I was able to, unfortunately, internalize that and became kind of a bit of more like a chronic issue during that time. So, for example, and gender plays a part in there, how much I remember I have a beautiful friend, like might be watching this, and he was like the genius of the classroom, and I used to think, I would not envy him or anything like that. On the contrary, I would be inspired by his clarity and his amazing ability to elaborate and communicate so well his ideas. He was a male. And it was great how the teacher, you would receive his knowledge and praise him. And I remember that, being quite a powerful thing in me, and also revealing to me that, yes, that type of shyness would not serve me very well either. So that social construction I had, would not be my best friend in that situation. So I needed to kind of find a way. Deconstruct it is one thing, but also, take a perspective, or take a step back and look at the bigger picture of things as well, and try to unite the elements that were all like floating in the air. If that makes any sense to you.
I think that's what it sounds like. If you're an introvert, you need to learn how to fake extroversion. I mean, I do that fairly well. Like, I'm a very, very introvert person, but I've learned how to sort of fake it a little bit. But I don't get energized by.
I was going to say, does that not tire you out, Chris?
I get energized by myself. What, just like talking? Talking's all right, but like.
No, I mean by faking. If you feel like you have to put on a different front to then, there is a thing around extroversion, isn't there? So that's
a little bit. I mean, yeah. I mean, I read this interesting book ages ago. I can't remember what it's called, but it was about basically how the entire world is a world that's built around extrovert values, and that maybe we could learn something as a society from introvert values, just the ability to be able to be quiet by yourself and really take time to reflect and just I think the COVID's taught us a lot of people this who didn't know it before. Like, there's a lot of memes you see online, like just on introvert groups and stuff, where it's just like, it's just fine, and we're just like being in lockdown or whatever, and people are just like, it's all right, I'm just on my own reading books or whatever, making joy. It's just like, perfect, it's fine. I mean, I know I'm being facetious, obviously. I mean, it was quite a bad situation, but in general, like, I think a lot of introverts dealt a lot better with that entire situation because we're pretty used to just being on our own and occupying ourselves. And I mean, it's not that I don't like people, or introverts in general don't like people. It's quite the opposite. But I really like having a very, very in-depth conversation with one or two people, as opposed to like a huge group where a whole other dynamic comes into play. And often, actually, I mean, this is just an observation, but often in a big group, it's often the most basic ideas that actually win, as opposed to the most sophisticated ones. In a sense, maybe that's just my own sort of perception of it. But I mean, look who we vote in politics, like Trump. I'm not going to go into politics, but like a lot of politicians now, people getting voted into power, they're idiotic. But people keep on voting for these idiots. And I'm not going to go into politics. I mean, it's a separate thing, isn't it? But it's just crazy. But
yeah, it is interesting, isn't it? I think sort of like you were saying there, the idea that our society's being built around the idea of extroversion, that's kind of, it comes back to it, doesn't it? It's that sort of social construction of these two things, and the fact that the extroverted one is the one that sort of is more looked for, or sort of more, I don't know, sought after, maybe more acceptable, and then the introversion is maybe less so, and like you say, it's changing maybe.
I've had a funny little thing that's happened to me. I don't know if this ever happened to anyone else before, but I used to notice it. And I noticed it a few times it's happened, where literally I'll tell a joke and then nobody will react. And then literally 2 minutes later, someone will say the same thing and everybody will laugh at them. And I'm just like, like this, like, what? Is it just because I'm so quiet and my delivery's not good? Like, I don't know. Just weird things like that happen when you're an introvert. And you notice all these weird things like how, I mean, you can get a bit of a chip on your shoulder by it as well, and I try not to do that. But I can remember when I was like a younger man, like a teenager, like I literally had this one friend who I'd say a joke or say something, and everyone would just ignore me, and then my mate said the exact same thing, and everyone would laugh at it. I'm like, what? I don't know.
It is an idea of social. Yeah, the idea of introvert is very good one, because extroverts are people that talk very loud, aren't they? Or generally louder than other people too. So they're bold, they are outgoing, they are loud. An introvert, because I'm an introvert, I understand, but I'm in the middle. I don't mind having a laugh, but I would always have very pay a lot of attention to how people are feeling around me. I would not invade. I would not speak louder than anybody. So I would say like I'm in the middle, or even more introverted kind of type of person.
Yeah.
But I understand that idea is very important, guys, because extroverts are not generally very reflective individuals. They tend to be more giggling individuals. They act out of joy, excitement, enthusiasm. And I like to think they are like more creative sometimes, because they can get things into action. Like they can, for example, build buildings and very quickly in comparison to other people. Like they are easily in terms of setting up businesses and getting things done. And they might sometimes not have a great deal of understanding and sometimes respect over people's emotions. But this is how I kind of balance things in my mind. It's the yin and yang balancing out. It's like, but what they contribute is also quite magnificent to the world, but in their own way, with their own limitations in terms of perhaps emotional recognition, social recognition, not quite there yet, or not great sensitivity. They also create many opportunities in many areas. So I know it is introverts are people that generally speaking, they go to the bone of existence. They're more like logical thinkers and scientifically led. Yeah. So basically that creates also a great movement in terms of science as well. And I don't mean to excuse anything in terms of any bad act no, I think actually it's not about that. It's about dissecting, the social meanings that we use and creating a space for mutual agreement, mutual debate in a very pure way, in a very supportive and constructive way, really. But yeah, I remember also being that person, Chris, observing everybody. Also taking, I was not too introvert. I was able to have a laugh and sometimes feeling like I'm laughing by myself too, but it is lovely. It's my own joy. What can I do? But but I think maybe many people might have also as well experienced that. But it's quite beautiful though.
I mean, I can have a laugh. I just need to be comfortable with people I'm having a laugh with first, really. I mean, I can be quite the fool, actually, eventually. At a certain point, I can be a big fool. But it's more like just have to develop that comfort with people just a bit. I mean, like I've spoken to you a few times, so I can be sort of relatively natural and, to do some rubbish jokes and everything. But if I'm with people I don't know that well, I'm just going to be a bit clammy and if I don't know people because I'm into quite a lot of niche things, it's hard for me to sort of find commonalities with people a lot of the time, to be honest. But yeah, anyway, I don't know.
Perhaps
it's not really about doing self-analysis, right?
I think we are grateful that you are bringing yourself into, it's the way you feel, and it's highly precious and it's highly important, and it is our lives on an individual level, I think, are very treasure-like, and thanks for sharing how you feel. Especially, it shows a lot that you don't care really about the social construct of gender, because you're very open and transparent and authentic about that. Actually, this is what you're showing.
I don't think that. I think people, definitely men, worry too much about it. Really, it's like you get I don't know. Many worry about I don't know, if they do something that's considered more feminine, that they're gay or whatever. This sort of homophobic thing or whatever, which is nonsense, of course. I mean, men think if you like reading poetry or writing poetry that I'm not going to say the word, but there's somehow a word that rhymes with woof, or whatever. All this sort of terrible homophobia that some groups of men just pass on and sort of pressurize other men into. And it's all just really nonsense. It all roots from insecurity, and it all just is absolute nonsense. That's to do with sexuality, obviously. But I mean, when it comes to I don't know. I mean, I think in general, if men were just more comfortable with the fact. I can only talk from my experience, obviously, because I'm a man. But I mean, I think if they were more comfortable in general with the fact that it doesn't necessarily have to be a dominant sort of expression, but we do have a feminine side, and vice versa for women. I mean, it's that whole anima animus thing, yeah, if you want to look at it from the younger perspective, and that's fine. I mean, like, and what? I mean, it's just it's part of the mind. It's a part of human nature. I think the more you develop that internal understanding of that side of yourself, the better. It doesn't mean I have to go out and start wearing a dress and bloody, whatever, and wear a wig. But it's more comes in terms of the internal, anima or animus, whichever one it might be, and finding creative expression for it, right?
I find this is where I feel like, for me, I think the social construction side of things helps, because if you think like, someone would say, because as a woman, you'd then be considered butch if you were more like masculine and stuff like that. And I think it's really interesting, like if you think of masculine and feminine as being something which is essentially created or made up and things like that, then for me, that opens a door for me to feel like I can be more myself, because actually, why should I have to try and fit into this idea of feminine when that was just somebody just has trying to like tell me that this is how a woman is or what is feminine, when really, if I want to go if I'm interested in maths and I want to do maths, like I used to love maths at school, and it was always something just really weird and like didn't fit, or just these different standards and ideas and concepts which close doors to people. Sometimes it's like emotions with men, things can be a bit shut down, and like you were saying, it's really, for me, it opens up avenues, if I think of it that way, for me to feel more comfortable to express myself as I am.
Yeah, and it's terrible if, like we've got a problem, I know from in computer science, of women getting into IT, and part of the reason I think is because girls are still discouraged from learning like mathematical subjects, and so it's still considered a boys thing, which is utter nonsense. Like the literal first computer programmer was a woman, Ada Lovelace, and there's no evidence to suggest that men or boys are better at mathematics naturally than women. It's just that is a socially constructive thing, certainly. I mean, like there's a great litany if you look through the history of computer programmers, mathematicians who are women. But for some reason, there's this sort of cultural stereotype that girls shouldn't do this or they should do that. I mean, we do have to sort of get over that as a society, because it's bad for men and women, really, just in different ways. And but we have to get over that, because we're not going to evolve as human beings if we don't get over these very strictly defined roles. It's like, I mean, what's still this thing about like getting boys to like get like soldiers, toy soldiers and stuff? I mean, what's that about? Like, what we're going to do? Like, let's just teach our boys to kill each other. I mean, it's just some of the things stuff can get really negative. I mean, I say this as someone who used to play like a lot of video games when I was younger, and like mostly shooting aliens, to be fair. But I don't know. It's I don't know. It's all right. Escaping fantasy to a degree is all right. I'm not puritanical and all that sort of thing. I think, and look, I've read lots of weird comic books and sort of, I actually love all that culture a bit, actually, in all honesty. But at the same time, like, I don't know. There's actually an interesting. I'll stop after this. I know I'm rambling a bit now. There's an interesting. What's his name? I can't remember. I've lost my train of thought. Sorry. Yeah. I'm going to mention a comic book artist, but I've completely forgotten his name now. So I'll just leave that thought there, park it. Grant Morrison, maybe. That was it, Grant Morrison. So he's like he did all these sort of comic books that sort of dealt with some of these ideas in some way, but I really just lost my train of thought, so I'll just leave it to anyone else who wants to pick it up.
Thanks for sharing that, though. I appreciate that. Definitely, I'm sure people will look up and be inspired by what you just spoke about, and it was really good. I'm just thinking that this conversation today has been very, very interesting. I don't know about how you feel about it. I would like to ask you individually, but I think it has been very, for me, I feel very calm, very inspired. And actually, it is also about the enjoyment of us three together. and having a chat. And we are all part of the same team. And we are here to also support people that are keen to, volunteer with us and actually work with us and have chats with us. We are a bunch of people that is scientifically driven, but also very eclectic in our approach and very down to earth. Number one rule for anybody that wants to work or volunteer with our group of people, our community, is to be authentic, to be themselves. And I think that being our only pillar, I would say, in itself, we are innately predisposed to be curious and to start asking the questions that will make our lives a bit better and our world too. So with that, yes, I would like to thank you, Louisa, for that opportunity. It was very good. I think your introduction and the conversation felt really, really positive. But yeah, I would like to hear you guys' views on our chat today as well before we say goodbye, because it's time to say goodbye. It's time to say goodbye.
I just really appreciate this topic. I think it's something that's really interesting. And like I said, I think it just helps me take home message to think critically and really take into account other people's perspectives and where they're coming from as individuals. So yeah, thank you.
Cool. Chris, did you find it all right?
Yeah, no, I found that really interesting. Thank you, Louisa, for giving us talking to us about social constructivism. I felt like I learned a lot more about it. Actually, had some more sort of interesting conversations, and Andreia, thanks for inviting me on and sort of your contribution as well. Like, there's been a lot of interesting sort of thoughts to riff off. I know I've been a bit rambling, but it's generally how I communicate, and just I sort of lose my train of thought sometimes and run off. But yeah,
no, all makes sense.
Good. Yeah, cheers.
Thank you very much, guys.
I'm sorry I look so pale as well. I look like I'm undead.
No, it's fine. It's fine. So yeah, maybe I'll finish up for today. Thank you guys very much for joining us today. Please share with us your knowledge and your thoughts on social constructionism, and support us if you can by following our page on Instagram, Utopian Psychology Institute. And if you have any questions, we are here to support you. Thanks a lot, and we'll say goodbye for now, right?